Abdu, I know that you were raised Muslim and you became a Christian. What advice would you give to the church on how to effectively reach Muslim people without burning bridges?
Yeah. Well, the first thing is to create relationships. They're not scary people. They're actually people just like you and me who want to live a life and just have children and have those children become successful and all these things. So it's very much like everybody else. However, there's important, I think, steps to reach Muslims on an intellectual and a heart level. Muslims tend to have these objections. The Bible's been changed. The Trinity makes no sense, and Jesus could never have died on the cross, and he certainly wasn't God. If you can verse yourself in how to respond to those issues, I think that's important. With the Bible's corruption, for example, I always think of it this way. Muslims have a hard time sustaining this objection that the Bible's been changed, even from the Quranic sources. So the Quran, for example, actually mentions the Bible, the Gospel, the Torah, and the Psalms of David in very glowing terms, that it's once revelation from God. It's Islam that teaches that they were corrupted over time. But here's the problem. Muslims believe that God is great. Allahu Akbar, God is greater. So he's the greatest possible being there could be. The greatest possible being would be trustworthy, and he would be all-powerful. He'd have to have at least those two qualities. If he's all-powerful, but the Bible was corrupted, that means he couldn't have stopped it. And if he couldn't have stopped it, then he's not all-powerful and he's not great. But let's say he could stop the Bible from becoming corrupted, but he let it happen. So the only way we know who God is, it becomes corrupted, and we believe blasphemous lies about him. That means God could have stopped it, but chose not to, making millions of people go to a damnation that is his fault. So if the Bible was corrupted, either God couldn't stop it or God wouldn't stop it. In either of those two cases, then God wouldn't be great. But for a Muslim, God has to be great. So if he's great, then God could, God would, and the history shows us God did preserve his word in the Bible. Then you go to the Trinity and the Incarnation, and it all comes down to this. If God is truly great, then he would express that greatest possible ethic in the greatest possible way, which is self-sacrifice. And love is the greatest ethic, and self-sacrifice is its greatest expression. If you and I are capable of that, then wouldn't it follow then that God should be at least as capable as we are of self-sacrifice? But he's more capable than us because he sacrifices in a way that's greater than we do. In our world, we sacrifice for those who love us and maybe for strangers, but not for those who hate us. People did not mourn the death of Osama bin Laden, for example. We cheered his death. But the Bible says God does not delight in the death of the wicked. And so he would naturally want to turn enemies into friends. He would want to transform those who hate him into those who love him. And that's when I remember where I was when I read it, Romans chapter 5, verse 8. For God demonstrates his love for us, his selfless, perfect, unbounded love, and that while we were sinners, God haters, Christ died for us. That to me is a God who is truly great. He would preserve his word, he would give of himself, and I think that you have both those two things in Christianity. So how can we witness to Muslims? Form relationships, find out what they care about, and then speak to them on a level they can relate to, which is this never-ending quest to understand who God is and his greatness.